At some point in a relationship, and I can't give you a timetable because relationships always operate on God's time, not ours. We never know how long it may take before we have navigated to the point where a relationship has some depth to it. It may take years and years and years. I remember Dan Deloney, right before he died, giving his witness about being a part of a prayer triplet, being a part of small groups. And one of the things that Dan said, Dan had been in this church since the 1950s. And one of the things I remember Dan saying in his testimony was, he said, a lot of you I've known for years and years, but I've never really known you until I got in a group with you or a prayer triplet with you. And so it's possible to know somebody for a long time and it only be on the surface, that we only show each other our masks. But in God's time, maybe 50 years, or maybe 50 minutes. We never know. The psalmist says, 1,000 years are as a day to the Lord. So we never know. It's God's time. But there comes a point when, in some relationships, we have an opportunity to take a dare. And the dare is to open up ourselves and share with another person something about our faith. Something about our own story of how we perceive God has worked in our lives. And it's kind of a challenge. That's a difficult thing to do, because sometimes we haven't even given much thought about how God has worked in our lives. We've given thought about what we believe or don't believe. We've given thought about our participation in church. We've given thought about what we like or don't like, about our opinions about things. But sometimes we've given very little thought, maybe because nobody's ever asked us. Sometimes we've given very little thought about our experiences with God. And after all, when we talk about our experiences of God, there's always a chance that somebody's going to think we're a little goofy. Because God, who's invisible, God, who is spirit, it's much easier for me to talk about my relationship with Gordy or to tell a Gordy story, which almost any story, you'll probably come back and say, yeah, but you think you got a Gordy story. Let me tell you what I've got here. So it's much easier to tell a Gordy story than it is to tell a God story. Because God is invisible. God is spirit. And we have to tell our God stories with a certain degree of humility. And there's a point where with God, we don't have the same kind of certainty that we have when we're talking about another person. When we talk about God, we can't really talk from certainty. We have to talk from faith. We have to have faith that that experience was a God experience. And so there comes a point when a relationship begins to get to the point where it's significant. There comes a point where we dare to share our story of faith, our God experiences with one another. And in the sharing of those experiences, we find that God is able to bless both the teller and the hearer in powerful ways. So, there are a lot of strangers. There are a lot of people we know. Most of those relationships are relatively superficial. But God has made us in God's image. And the one who has made us, who knows us the best, knows of our need to have more than just pets and acquaintances. And so the Lord God made for that first human other human companions and partners. It is in faithfulness to the God who made us, to the God who knows us, that we walk across the room and say, my name is.